What is the scariest paranormal story you have ever experienced? I was staying with a group of friends rock climbing in Spain. Really creepy Airbnb. Lots of strange things happened while we were staying there. The creepiest was one morning we were getting ready for the day, packing food and generally getting our shit together, and I went upstairs to grab something. As I was heading back downstairs I walked past my friend's boyfriend on the landing and saw him turn and go into his and my friend's room. I think I asked him something, but he didn't reply. I thought rude and headed downstairs. Walked into the kitchen and he was there sorting food out with my friend. Everyone swore he'd been downstairs the whole time. Plus there was only one staircase and it would have been impossible for him to overtake me and get to the kitchen before me without me noticing. I went back upstairs and checked their room and there was no one up there but me. I've never experienced anything creepy or inexplicable before we stayed in that Airbnb, and I'd say I'm skeptical about supernatural paranormal stuff, but multiple things happened on that trip that spooked me. Tell us more. Lights turning themselves off and on all the time, especially in the room I was sharing with a friend. I'm forgetful, so blamed myself. But got to the point friend and I turned the lights off in our room. Say we have turned the lights off to each other and head out. We'd come back and the lights would be back on. Was a old building, so dodgy wiring. I was having trouble sleeping, so decided to stay in the front bedroom by myself one night. Hated it. Hated it, hated it, hated it. Had 2 doors, one to the hall, one to the games room. Furnished with massive, ugly, ancient wooden furniture and the spookiest statue of a crucified Jesus. I had all the lights off and doors shut to fall asleep. Woke up in the night to the lights on and both doors wide open. There were scratches all over the inside of one of the bedroom doors which had a bolt on the outside. Same room had a locked door in it. That made no sense with the floor plan. Can't remember the specifics, but we couldn't make the layout make sense, and I'm still so curious to this day what we'd have found if we cold opened it. The entire top floor was sealed off by a locked metal gate on the stairs. My friends got over it being climbers and went exploring. They're all matter of fact, don't believe in spooky things. Pride themselves on it, but all came back spooked and shaken. Far as I remember there were only rooms with old furniture in it up there. I heard someone with bare feet running around one night when everyone was asleep. My bed was under a window which looked out on a big balcony we never used that connected to the upstairs hall, and I thought I saw one of the girls run past it. She was stupid drunk that night, so assumed she was up to shenanigans and got up to check on her. She was dead asleep in her room. I even tried to wake her and she was blacked out. Only 2 other girls on the trip. One I shared a room with and she was asleep, and the other had gone to bed with her BF soberly and sensibly hours before and said she'd slept through the whole night. Not the prank playing kind. Especially not likely to sacrifice sleep to duck about, as they both take their climbing VV seriously. I went back to bed and almost immediately heard the bare feet running around again, so I just shut my eyes and pretended it wasn't happening. So once while I was home alone, my neighbor knocked on my door. This was when we still lived in Oklahoma and I was homeschooled. He was a bit younger than me, but we still played Halo together. I was 13 at the time. I let him in and we had a conversation about what I thought the afterlife would be like. And this was really odd for him. We talked for a few minutes before he decided to leave. When my parents got home they told me he had a heart attack at school and died. I once felt a hand on my face when I was sleeping. I had the covers covering my entire face and felt something push down lightly and then a bit harder. I was absolutely terrified, and when I finally mustered up the courage to look, nothing was there. It never happened again, but there have been a few times where something similar has happened. This is something I've never been able to rationalize. For months after my dad died, we were getting landline calls where no one would answer on the other end. This was in 2002. So, while robocallers were a thing, it definitely wasn't as prevalent as it is today. But we did assume they were probably wrong numbers or something. We didn't have any phones that displayed caller ID at the time. Well, one time, after getting yet another call with only silence on the other end, I jokingly said, "Dad, if that's you, call my cell phone. I want to preface this by saying I rarely ever got calls on my cell phone and never spam calls in those days. I was 18 with an unlisted number that only my family and a few friends had. Just a few minutes later, my phone rang with a number I'd never seen before, with what I'd just said fresh in my mind. I kind of freaked out and didn't answer. I was on my way out to go somewhere with my mom. So when we got in the car, I told her what happened. We made the decision to call the number back. It never rang, but there was activity at the other end, muffled static and the sound of numbers being dialed slowly. It was the weirdest thing. Both my mom and I said hello, but no one ever answered. Has anyone ever had something like that happen to them when dialing a number? I've never had it happen before or since. Edited for spelling. About 10 years ago, I'd have been 24. I was still living with my parents. My bedroom was in the basement. One night, around 3 AM, I was woken up to the sounds of a young child crying. It sounded like it was coming from just outside my window. I couldn't just look out the window because it was covered in ivy, so I quickly hopped out of bed to go help the kid. As I got closer to my bedroom door, I could hear the crying was actually on the other side of the door. I opened the door. No one is there, and the crying stopped. Spooked, I immediately jumped back in bed and the crying started again. Later that day at dinner, my family was sitting around the table, and I brought up my experience I had. One of my sisters told a story about how, when she was a kid, she'd always leave her room at night to go sleep with my parents because she'd see a little girl walking out of her closet. As she left her room and got to my parents' door waiting to be let in, because the door was locked, she'd see the little girl walking up the stairs that were right there. After her telling this story, my youngest sister looked scared and asked the little girl, "Is she wearing a pink nightgown with shoulder-length brunette hair?" Now my other sister was scared because that is exactly who she saw. My youngest sister told how she had similar experiences with that little girl coming out of the closet at night or walking up the stairs at night. I'm convinced that something happened either in that house before we moved in or on that land that my parents' house was built on. A floating head. I was putting beef in the slow cooker because I wanted it done for morning. It was late at night. I reached up to grab some seasonings and heard creaking. I told my kids to get in bed. I see something out of my peripheral vision and there was no body, but a head of a bald, pale man floating 2 maybe 4 feet off the ground in the middle of the floor. Its face kept looking as if it was sad or like it was begging. It locked eyes with me. I ducking froze. I had a darker wall with a coat rack with my husband's work jackets, so it stood out like a sore thumb. I looked away thinking it was my imagination, but when I looked back it was still there, so I ran out the back door because I'd have to pass it to get upstairs with my husband and kids. I ended up calling him on my phone to come walk me in. I was wide awake, not sleepy, not out of it, on no medication. I have no reason to see that ever. Haunted furniture. Not my story, but my mom's. Her friend called her and was slightly hysterical that her house was haunted. My mom is a scientist and was very skeptical, but agreed to come check it out. The friend was adamant that either the house was haunted or she was going crazy, and in either case, she needed help. My mom arrives at the friend's house and she begins showing my mom what she's seen. First, in the living room, there is a brass lamp that is shiny, so you can see the reflection of the kitchen behind as you look at the lamp. She asks my mom to just watch the reflection in the lamp. My mother sees a shadowy man step out from behind the wall. She turns around. There's no one there. This phenomenon repeats itself several times. Next, they go into the friend's son's room, turn off the lights, close the door, but leave the hallway light on. As she's looking at the strip of light under the door, very clearly she sees a shadow of 2 feet step in front of the door. Open the door. No one there. Again. This phenomenon repeats itself several times. Lastly, they go lay in the friend's bed. She fluffs up the comforter and it falls on top of their legs. Very clearly you could see the indentation of someone sitting on top of the comforter. Fluff up the comforter again. And it happens again. All of these events would repeat themselves whenever she looked at them. My mom insists that she really tried to investigate all of these events, but could find no other explanation. The friend went to a medium psychic type soon after, who told her it was her furniture that was haunted, not the house. The furniture was second-hand, bought at a garage sale, so she got rid of the furniture and the paranormal stuff stopped. I had a friend, when I was around 8, that I would always hang out with. She drove me up the wall, because if we were in different rooms and I called out to her, she'd never answer. She would just walk into the room and then respond. I hated it, because it would scare me when she'd silently pop up out of nowhere when I called out. Her whole family was like this too. I thought it was just a politeness thing, because one of my aunts would always yell at me for shouting what if she called me from another room. But my aunt was only angry that I never said yes. So yeah, I thought my friend and her family were just weird. I asked my friend why she could never just simply answer me when I yelled for her. She'd always just shrug and say there's no real reason and that's just how she rolls. I pointed out that her parents and siblings were the same, and she said they rolled like that too. Okay, fine. Well, one day I was over there and her dad was at work and her stay-at-home mom went to take one of her brothers to hockey practice and the younger one to the doctor's office or something. She left us home because she didn't feel like carting around a bunch of kids and she knew we wouldn't tear the house apart like the boys would. An hour after she left, my friend and I were upstairs together doing craft shit when I heard someone downstairs call her name. It happened twice and she didn't notice. I told her what I heard and we listened. After a while we heard the voice faintly call to her. It sounded like it was coming from the garage. I was like, oh, your mom is back. Ask her what she wants. My friend just quietly got up and walked hell the way downstairs instead of yelling back. I followed her but was pissed. Like, why are we walking all this way when simply yelling back would get us all the answers we need? We go in the garage and there's no one there. We check the entire first floor and nothing. Doors and windows were all closed and locked still. I'm a bit weirded out and my friend nonchalantly grabs some ice cream from the fridge and we go and sit outside on the doorstep to eat it. I ask her WTF was that about and she's like, yeah, so you ask me why we don't answer anyone calling from other rooms or outside and this is why. She explained that in her culture they believed that demons use the voices of your loved ones to try to lure you to heck or something. She said you're safe if you don't answer them, which is why her family would always come into the room to verify the person calling them was actually a person. Now I'm freaked out and don't want to go back inside at all until her mom would return. My friend was pretty unaffected by it all and said she's used to it. In my panic, I asked if the demons ever shapeshifted so that even if you see your loved one who called you, it really wasn't them. She got quiet and thought about that, then got scared and started crying. She said she never thought of that before. We both ran to our other friend's house down the road and stayed there. Edit, just to not end on a creepy note, we ended up at our other friend's house and promptly scared the shit out of her and her siblings with our story. Her poor mom had a house of like 6 crying children and did her best to calm us all down. She told us it wasn't real and that it was the wind or whatever. My spooky friend's mom eventually showed up when she got home and couldn't find us. All us kids were in the yard and our friend's mom was explaining what happened to her and said that we probably watched too many scary movies and imagined the voice. Spooky friend's mom whipped around to us and in a panicked tone yelled, oh no, you answer. You can probably imagine that ruined any progress the other mom made in alleviating our fears, laughing my butt off. Once I went to close the curtains as I was heading to sleep. Once I approached the window I saw a face staring back at me. It looked at me. It looked surprised and suddenly ducked. We've always had 2 large dogs at our house that bark at anything that ever approaches the house. They hadn't made a noise. I went outside and found nothing. I told my parents and just laughed at me and said it was my reflection. I don't think a reflection world made movements I didn't make. I texted my friend about it and he told me it was probably a pedophile, which creeped me out even more. If it were a person, the dog's world definitely sniffed them out. There's no way they could have gotten through the fence without the dogs noticing. If it was something paranormal, it also seems strange, since there have also been other odd instances where my dogs seemed to detect something otherworldly going on. Never found out what I saw. Definitely wasn't my reflection. I'm a heavy believer in a reasonable explanation for everything. Slept in the basement of my house just to set the scene. My girlfriend at the time and I were arguing, and in the middle of me attempting to make my point, my shoe rolled across the floor a good 6 feet on its own. I kept going with my point, wasn't gonna have some paranormal shit not let me make my point. About a week later, I'm trying to sleep. My door shook as it usually does when my heater would turn on and off, and it woke me up. I of course have the image of a shoe rolling across the floor in my head, so I'm keeping an eye out. Next to my door is my laundry, or hamper as some would call it. It's collapsible when wanted, but it was open and upright tonight. Few minutes after the door shook, the hamper collapsed on itself. Trying to still stay logical here but still feeling quite eerie, I started to get so paranoid I'm thinking I'm hearing someone walk around my room as the floors are quite noisy. Then icing on the cake, my TV turns on and starts rapidly changing channels on its own. Got up, unplugged my TV, put music on my phone on, and buried myself in covers like I was a 10-year-old and I was 18 at the time, lol. 1991 NZ. At 15 years old, I had just got off a 2-week grounding. My mum reluctantly let me go out on a school night to watch a movie at a friend's house. The movie was due to finish at 9 PM and I was expected home for 9:30 PM. The walk home is through suburbia and usually would take no more than 10 minutes. My mum made it quite clear that if I wasn't back by 9:30 PM, I'd be grounded for another week. We watched the movie. I immediately got up, said goodbye to my friend's parents, and left, noting it was just after 9 PM. I got about halfway home, and a large German Shepherd style dog appeared in front of me, snarling, drooling and blocking my path. I went across the road, and there it was in front of me again. Stationary but still growling. I zigzagged up and down the road, and it would appear, and then disappear from sight. I then decided to sprint home. It followed me for a while, not running or barking, just walking and growling. I was a fat kid, so was completely out of breath. When I got to my front door, I knocked and could hear the TV on, and my mother let me in with a real mean look in her eye, chastising me for being late. And that was another week's grounding, and how her and my dad had been going mad with worry. I exclaimed, late. It can't be more than 9:20 PM. I left friend's house at just gone 9 PM. Ring her parents, they'll tell you. My mother scoffed and said she'd rang my friend's parents and they confirmed I'd left at about 9. So what in God's name had I been doing for the last 2 hours? It was 11 PM. I told my mum the story of the dog and she must have been able to see in my eyes that it wasn't bullshit. We checked every clock in the house and my mum even rang the speaking clock. It was 11 PM. We rang my friend's parents to tell them I was okay. Her parents even told my mum that I was anxious to leave at 9 PM as I didn't want to be grounded again. I still 30 years later can't explain what happened that night. I'd been followed by the hound from heck, and in the process, lost 2 hours of my life. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing for more videos.